Call this meeting of the James City County Board of Supervisors for the purpose of a business meeting to order. Mr. Stevens, would you please call the roll?
Mr. Eisenhower?
Here.
Mr. Hippel?
Here.
Ms. Larson?
Here.
Ms. Sadler?
Here.
Mr. McGlinnan?
Here.
All present.
I'd request that there be a motion to amend the agenda to add a closed session for the purpose of discussion of property disposition.
Motion to
approve. Motion to approve. Mr. Stevens, call the roll, please.
Mr. Eisenhower?
Aye.
Mr. Hippel?
Aye.
Ms. Larson?
Aye.
Ms. Sadler?
Aye.
Mr. McGlinnan?
Aye.
Motion carries.
All right. We have no presentations for this session, so we have a consent calendar that includes the following items. It includes appropriations of $112,800 for COVID-19 recovery, contract award of $370,226 for the War Hill Sports Complex basketball court replacement, the Heritage Humane Society contract for animal shelter management services, minutes adoption, and our public housing agency plan. Anybody wish to pull any of those items from the consent calendar? If not, do I have a motion? Motion to approve. Motion to approve the consent calendar. Mr. Stevens, please call the roll.
Ms. Larson?
Aye.
Ms. Sadler?
Aye.
Mr. Hippel?
Aye.
Mr. Eisenhower?
Aye.
Mr. McGlinnan?
Aye.
Motion carries.
Well, we have a couple of items for board discussion today, though, and we're very pleased that members of the Planning Commission are here to talk to us about a number of items that are moving along. And so I will welcome the Planning Commission to us today and turn it over to Mr. Holt.
Thank you very much. Just a point of order on our part before I turn it over to our chair. I'll need to do a roll call to convene the Planning Commission. Mr. Rogers. Mr. Rogers represents the Berkeley District. Ms. Null. Ms. Null represents the Stonehouse District. Mr. Rose. Mr. Rose represents the Roberts District. Mr. Polster. Mr. Polster represents the Jamestown District and is vice chair to the commission this year. Mr. Haldeman. Mr. Haldeman is an at-large member. Mr. Kropp. Mr. Kropp represents the Powhatan District. Mr. O'Connor. Mr. O'Connor is an at-large member and is chair of the Planning Commission this year. Planning Commission, Mr. Chairman, we have a quorum, and I'll turn it over to you.
Mr. O'Connor, members of the Planning Commission, welcome. Thank you very much. I understand we're going to start today with consideration of the Planning Division's work program.
Yes, sir. So good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for the opportunity to be here. First and foremost, I would just like to thank the planning staff and the rest of my colleagues for all the work that went into our recent comp plan update. Obviously, that was 18 months of a lot of work, and we still have a lot of work to go. So today's work session will cover our Planning Division work program for fiscal year 23 and touch on anticipated work program items for future years. You know, we're happy to answer any other questions while we're here, or if you have any opportunities for discussion, we're happy to answer questions as well. So at this time, I'd like to turn it over to Mr. Haldeman. He's chairing our policy committee, so he will be leading a lot of the policy rewrites this year in the ordinances.
Thank you very much, Mr. Haldeman. We've been giving you a lot of work recently.
More staff than me, I think, but it will be a lot of work. It should be rewarding work, I hope. But with your permission, I'd like to begin with a discussion on ordinance amendments for the fiscal year 2023. At its meeting on April 14th, the Policy Committee reviewed the 5 initiating resolutions passed by the board in the last few months, excuse me, and they're listed here on your screens. The committee discussed that staff will commence work on all 5 of the board's initiating resolutions with initial emphasis on scenic road protection, that's the first item, and the potential revision of zoning and subdivision ordinance requirements in the A1 and R8 districts, that's the second. With regard to lot sizes in the A1 and R8 districts, the committee discussed that the focus should be on 1 lot per 20 acres, as that was included in the comprehensive plan revision. The committee also discussed how this revision might affect the requirement for central wells outside the PSA and the need for using PDR funds to protect open space outside the PSA. With regard to revising the use list for B1 district, that's the 5th item, the committee discussed staff may also look at design guidelines, but that would probably come later. So next, here we are. The next slide. The committee also reviewed the information in the staff memo regarding the anticipated ordinance process and the public input approach. The committee discussed that the anticipated process would include staff presenting their findings to the policy committee for discussion and guidance. Up to 3 policy committee meetings will be scheduled for each subject. The process will likely continue through fiscal 2023 and will involve periodic discussions and check-ins with you, the Board of Supervisors. In terms of a time frame for the Scenic Roadway Protection Ordinance, we are currently anticipating staff to begin work at the conclusion of this meeting, if you're all in agreement, and going through June and July with the first meeting with the policy committee scheduled for August, and a check-in with the board in September. For the A1 and R8 lot size ordinances, we are currently anticipating a policy committee review in August as well. The other 3 amendment items will be scheduled for initial policy committee review in the ensuing months. The policy committee members would appreciate any feedback or guidance on these items at this time. Should there be none, the committee is looking forward to beginning a draft ordinance review process. Thank you.
I've got these next two as we get further down into the weeds and getting some staff direction, although I think we've got really good staff direction at this point. You know, of course, the board's initiating resolution directing staff to establish lot sizes in the R8 and A1 district that are consistent with the rural lands designation, description, and development standards. So it's interesting when you start to peel back those layers of the zoning ordinance, while there's only one minimum lot size set forward in the R8 district, the A1 district actually has 6 different minimum lot standards, sort of, you know, been cobbled together over the years, as you can tell, depending on what the specific use is or other factors. So we have a minimum lot size for single-family dwellings, 2-family dwellings. We have a separate lot size standard for non-residential uses, family subdivisions, which I know we're going to want to preserve as we move forward in that. We talked about those before. Different requirements for clusters, and there's actually a grandfathering provision in there that allows for subdivisions of 6 acres or less for parcels that were in existence prior to 1989. So again, I think your resolution before was pretty straightforward and gave staff some really good direction. So unless otherwise directed by the board, staff, of course, is going to proceed with pulling together an ordinance and updating those minimum lot sizes for the residential use types, you know, and which includes the clustering, but then leaving in the minimum lot standards for the non-residential, leaving alone family subdivision. Certainly, if you've got different direction for us, let us know, but we're going to start there and bring that ordinance for you for review by the policy committee, public hearing with the planning commission, and then bring it back to the board. Again, I think we got some really good guidance from the board and direction from their initiating resolution. So specific to the provision of that initiating resolution eliminating central well system requirements for subdivisions with the new minimum lot size, you know, that resolution that was adopted does grandfather in lots of 25 or fewer acres, since subdivisions of grandfathered parcels would then ultimately yield 8 lots at most using the current 3-acre size. I think it's a good opportunity, again, as we talked through the comp plan update process, to have staff proceed with developing an ordinance that would altogether eliminate that central well requirement. We'll work on those logistics with JCSA and make sure all those I's are dotted and T's are crossed in the ordinance. Again, we'll bring that to the board. Should you want to do a different direction than that, let us know. We're happy to incorporate that. But that's the direction that we think we received during the adoption of the initiating resolution. That's how we're going to proceed. Yes.
Question. The grandfathering in of less than 25 acres, that would still remain at the 1 to 3 then?
Correct.
Okay, just want to clear that up. All right,
Yep.
thank you.
So that, turn it back over to Mr. O'Connor.
So as the board will recall, the 2045 comp plan implementation chapter has a category of GSAs that are regulatory and guideline updates. The list can be used for reference for updating portions of the zoning and subdivision ordinance in future fiscal years. The memo that you have in your package, prepared by staff, has identified working on certain GSAs from this list, and further discussions to decide on the anticipated scope and process will likely occur over the course of the next year. And other work programs for the division and commission, I think we're on the next slide. Oh, thanks. So other work programs for the division and commission include routine duties such as plan review. This year we'll see as a renewal year for agricultural and forestal districts. So the division and commission will review the districts this summer in preparation for the board's consideration in late summer or certainly by early fall. And staff will continue to work on the leave behind model tools to help assess future fiscal, transportation, and land use impacts. So again, this was just a brief update for you all. We're all here and happy to answer questions if you have any questions of us, and we appreciate the opportunity to have this meeting with you and present it today, and happy to throw it back to you, Mr. McGlennon, for any questions or comments.
Thank you very much, Mr. O'Connor. Does anybody have any questions or comments for the Planning Commission?
I just wanted to make sure I understand correctly that the first two items we talked about, you guys are going to be starting with the policy committee in August, and that would then, after your series of policy committee meetings, you would check back in with us, and that after that it would go back from the policy committee to the Planning Commission, and then finally back to the board for actual adoption. What I'm looking at from the August timeframe, what kind of timeframe are you looking at for those two to actually come back to the board?
That's a really good question. So certainly, I think the change in minimum lot sizes, again, I think with some of the clarity that the board has provided, I think that will come back to the board sooner than later. I do know the purpose of the August policy committee meeting to talk about the scenic roadway protection. There are some very different tools that will help us to accomplish that initiating resolution, ones that take us from an implementation and a zoning ordinance point of view in just very different discrete directions. And just preliminarily thinking there's three right off the bat. And so I think we want to have that discussion with the policy committee in August while you are otherwise not meeting, to prepare for a work session with the board in September. We can bring those choices back to you, get the direction at that point, make sure we're on track, and then proceed from there. Historically, the process has allowed for up to 3 policy committee meetings. Again, that's just a previous practice that we've used for years and years and years. Really, it just sort of depends on what outstanding questions the policy committee has before it recommends the ordinance back to the Planning Commission for full public hearing. In the instance where staff has been able to sort of button up some of the recommendations and where there really aren't some of those decision points, we'll obviously be able to get back to you sooner on that one. I don't think we have any big decision points we need to return to the board on for A1 and R8 lot sizes, but I know we're going to have some for your September work session for the scenic roadway protection. So, I think sort of schedule-wise, again, I always like to at least get through that first policy committee meeting to sort of know what questions the commission has, what more work they want to see before we can plot out some of those remaining deadlines. But certainly I think that one will be ready to proceed sooner than some of the tools we'll need to develop for the scenic roadway protection.
Thank you.
Paul, is there a way for the public to watch the policy committee work? There's no weighing in, I would assume, but until the larger meeting, but.
Again, historically, the policy committee has really just sort of been a working group. It's not televised. It's been held, but those meetings are publicized. The public is absolutely welcome to attend. The commission has always been accommodating, and sort of thinking back most recently to the Bs, there's not a standing place on there for public hearing or public comment, but Commission and Policy Committee has historically been very welcoming of comment, and you've only had usually a couple people show up to those where you don't get 50 or 100. So, they tend to manage that pretty well. But, those are always good, open, not televised, but they are very much open, and those dates are advertised. And of course, the full public hearing when we get to the Planning Commission level will be televised. It's in this room, it's in this form and in this format, and folks can sign up to speak for, up to 3 or 5 minutes or longer if they're a group.
Paul, with the increased interest in preserving the rural lands up at upper end of the county especially, I would be interested in your working groups having other alternatives that we could work with larger landowners. I know we have the AFD program, so that we're not just strapped into this is all you get. I know other localities offer different options on what can be done to keep their land viable and that sort of thing. I'd be interested in seeing other opportunities potentially.
A terrific segue, because the next component.
I set you up, didn't I?
Yes, how about that? And again, based on the earlier board request, staff was able to develop just a really terrific decision tree, depending on what the ultimate goal of the property owner is, based on the timeline. Is it short-term, long-term preservation, to sort of better match up what they're looking for with what tools we have available. And we're going to showcase that flow chart, that decision tree with you as part of the next
So you're
segment.
looking at other options other than what
A lot of different
typically have been
options,
out there.
and
Okay.
Certainly the lot size isn't meant to be an end-all be-all. I think it's one tool of the comp plan to implement those desired results. And again, as we transition to the other part of the work session today, business meeting today, we'll talk about what those other tools are. But those are separate. One's not going to replace another. They all have different goals. They all have different aspects to them, and we're excited to be able to share those with you today.
Thank you.
Questions? If not, let me just ask this question. And we've teed up a lot of issues for you to be considering, and I wondered, I know this isn't something you've prepared for necessarily, but if the Planning Commission as a group or individual planning commissioners have any sense of whether there are areas there where they think we ought to be prioritizing consideration of ordinance amendments and changes.
It's a trick question today. I will certainly
No,
open
and
it
I
up
don't mean,
to.
I don't necessarily mean for you to, but I just don't want to assume that we are the only ones who are thinking about the ordinances and prioritizing. If there's a sense in which there's something we ought to be sort of keeping an eye on, and you guys are looking at these issues on a regular basis, and
Sure. I think, and I'll ask Mr. Haldeman to weigh in, because I didn't attend our last policy committee meeting, but I think all those items that we have initiating resolutions on, and certainly the central well development, are very germane to some of the cases we've had recently, and certainly where we're going with rural lands. I think one of our challenges for years has been how we define rural lands, and whether they're in the PSA or outside the PSA, and getting our homeowners and citizens to understand that. I do think Ms. Rosario's presentation, I will certainly invite Mr. Kropp or Mr. Polster to weigh in, because Mr. Kropp is very close to the rural economic development work that's been done over the years, and is certainly an advocate for that. And Mr. Polster has some great thoughts and comments about PDR and what the litmus test becomes for those types of things. So I'll invite them to make comments if they'd like, and we'll throw it your way if you care to, or anybody else.
To adding things at our last policy committee meeting, I think I mentioned earlier, one of your initiating resolutions was revising the use list for the B1 district. It didn't mention anything about design guidelines. It was a suggestion of the policy committee that we also look at design guidelines in the B1 district. And I would expect things like that to come up a lot. Our policy committee members have a lot of attributes. Shyness isn't one of them. So I would expect to hear a number of suggestions. So obviously all subject to your approval.
Two things that come to mind. And the first one has nothing to do with what we're getting ready to do, but I think it's going to have a secondary effect. And that is when you look at the schedule of the AFD process that we're going to go through, is we'll probably see that coming back to the board maybe in the October timeframe. And so now you have the piece with the 1 to 20 acres and the impact that it may have on those folks. And when you take a look at the 125 properties that we're going to look at, about 81 of them are in the AFDs. And so I'm sure there's going to be some concern about those owners and where they're going. It goes to Ms. Sadler's point about what are the different alternatives, what are we doing to reach out to them, that will probably end up evolving onto you in terms of questions. So that's one thing that's kind of an ancillary thing. The second point is that when you listen to Tammy's work today, one of the things that I think that she's trying to do is to determine where in the county and what we want to preserve. And so when you look at the mapping pieces that they've done so far, you're going to see a correlation to those pieces of property that we're talking about, as well as in the AFD, in terms of the habitat core, the forestry, the things that we want to preserve. And so there's a corollary to, I think, what we're going to do, once again, for alternatives to those landowners out there, that they can understand that their property has other values that can be recompensed. And once again, I think it goes to your point, what other tools may be available to reimburse them for the value of their property, but still retain it. And so I think that's one of the issues that you're going to see coming out of what we're going to do, as well as the work of Tammy's, which is going to be finished in probably the July timeframe. So there's going to be a confluence of these things coming together for your consideration.
Thank you, Mr. Polster. Let me just offer the opportunity, if any other members of the Planning Commission would like to add anything to our discussion today. We do rely on you quite a bit for guidance and advice on so many different issues. We appreciate very much the time that you put into that and the effort. So if anybody else has anything they'd like to add, I want to give them the opportunity to do so.
Anybody else? So seeing and hearing none, any other questions?
I think we're.
I have one, Mr. Chairman. And we hear it a lot in the upper end of the county. You know, the people that own the larger pieces of land, of course, the original owners or maybe the second or third generation now has passed on, and the younger generation is taking ownership, and they can't keep up with the taxes and everything else. And so they look at, how do I get out of it? And I want the citizens to know that, you know, this may be, you know, I've heard a little bit about, well, you're trying to land grab and all that. There's one guy that's putting it on the internet and Facebook and everything else that is, you know, he knows a little bit about our government. And he's basically trying to smear it as something that's a land grab. And I think it gives the opportunity for people that may not know where to go next. Do I sell it to a developer or do I preserve it? Mom and dad love this piece of land, but I can't afford it. So this might be an opportunity to go, okay, it'll be divided into 20-acre lots, but it will be, maybe there's something we can do as far as private investing, the green space, the PDR, the ADF, and any of the other opportunities that may come up as we go through this. And it'll give the citizens other opportunities to preserve their land and hold their land, where they may be looking at it going, you know, I can only do taxes for so long and I'm going to have to sell. So, you know, the naysayers that are out there that think the government's out to grab your land, really we're out to try to give you different avenues and help with different things, but keep the country look of James City County and some of the rural areas, and leave it how people really enjoy it today, and keep it for future generations, but give them those avenues in order to go, hey, I can go in this program or this program or that program, and I can hold on to the land. And you never know, 10, 20 years how things will change and what will move around. And, farming may be a different avenue than it is today in 30 or 40 years. So it gives us that opportunity to preserve that land and keep it in a rural area, a rural setting. So I want to thank y'all for y'all's work.
Well, thank you. And just to reiterate or to remind you all, in the comp plan, I think we did a good job of trying to preserve that character in these different mixed-use districts and consistent with the portion of the county that they're in and which community character corridor they fall in and those pieces. So I think there's a lot of protection for both the landowners and the community in the design guidelines and those pieces that will follow on as part of this.
And I know with, as you listen to other people who have moved here and have come from other places, and they go, I remember when such and such, and I won't name the cities or towns, but I remember when such and such had this or had that, and they developed it. Remember when we used to, mom and dad would take us down to the farm and do such and such and do this, and they've lost it. And I've never seen any community take a neighborhood and buy it up, tear the houses down, and put it back to a farm. I've seen a mini farm become a neighborhood. So once you lose it, it's lost. It's not something that we're going to go back in 30 years and reclaim. That's not going to happen. So it's very critical that we watch, as we develop. There'll always be development coming, but how we develop and how we use the land to the best benefit of the citizens, all the citizens, the owners, and the ones that are looking to try to help preserve it. Thank you.
Thank you. So, Mr. O'Connor, would you like to adjourn your meeting?
So at this point, yes, I would. I've invited everybody to stay for Ms. Rosario's presentation, and if you have any follow-on questions, feel free to call on folks. But at this point, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn. So we have a motion. All in favor? Any opposed? We're adjourned. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much. Next discussion item is Tammy Rosario is going to be talking to us about our open space program and the options that are available to us.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the board. Today's presentation provides an overview of the open space programs that exist in the county, with an emphasis on the green space and purchase of development rights programs. It also contains a brief update on the natural and cultural assets plan, which will be moving through the final stage of its process this summer. As detailed in the memo, James City County has a long history of public support and action on conservation and open space preservation. Through that time, it's built a toolbox with specialized but complementary tools to conserve our natural and cultural resources. These tools have been added in response to new opportunities with new state legislation and programs, comprehensive plan public input and actions, high-profile development cases which highlighted particular needs that our then existing programs could not adequately address, and new funding opportunities that they allowed the county to expand its programs. These tools continue to be helpful today to fit a wide range of circumstances for the landowner and for the county. The county has 4 main tools, each with a different form and focus and result. Use value taxation and agricultural and forestal districts, which we talked about a little bit in the presentation beforehand, provide temporary tax reductions and land use protections for agricultural, horticultural, and forested land to interested and qualified landowners. These programs have been around since the 1970s, 1980s, and the county currently has 13 districts, 12 of which are up for renewal this year. The majority of the districts have 4-year terms. The county also has a variety of policies and ordinances which have existed from the 1980s and have been developed through today. They encourage or require the preservation of certain resources. Examples include sensitive archaeological resources, rare species, community character corridor protections, and protections for water quality. This more so happens when property is actually in a position to be developed. The Green Space Program, which came about in 1996, allows the county to proactively purchase open space, easements, or entire properties as strategic opportunities arise. On properties deemed high priorities by the Board of Supervisors, this program primarily focuses on highly sensitive land inside the primary service area or special situations outside the PSA using criteria established by the board. Examples of properties that have been acquired under this program in the past include the Jamestown Beach Event Park and Marina, as well as Whitehall Tavern. The Purchase of Development Rights Program is the fourth tool, and that sets a process whereby landowners can apply during an open application period for consideration of easement purchases by the county. So the landowner still retains ownership, but the county can purchase the easement, which requires a certain set of protections. During that open application process, county staff and the PDR committee score, rank, and recommend applications to the Board of Supervisors using an adopted ordinance, a set of criteria, and a ranking criteria point system. This program recognizes the broad range of natural and cultural resources important to county citizens in its scoring system, but it places emphasis on agriculture and forestry in rural lands. Examples of past properties acquired through this, easements, acquired through this process include Mill Farm Christmas Trees and Berry Farm and Bushneck Farm. As mentioned previously, it can be confusing for property owners to know which tools to use when deciding the future of their property, and so staff developed the following decision tree tool to help both landowners and staff work through what options might be available. There are taxing incentives, as I mentioned, use value taxation or AFD program, which has temporary benefits to both the county and the landowner. And there are funding incentives such as PDR or green space land conservation programs, which are more permanent. There may even be situations in which both are appropriate. Once the county and property owners sort through the complex options to find a tool that matches their intentions and the property's attributes, then the county can move forward on evaluating the property more closely and finding out which provides the best fit. Just to do a deeper dive, the first program that we would evaluate would be use value taxation and AFDs. As mentioned before, this is best for temporary protection and deferring development, as it does not eliminate the potential for development altogether. It does a good job of encouraging farming and forestry uses, and it also has a great deal of flexibility in terms of the size of parcel that might be eligible for this program. In agricultural or horticultural use, the minimum amount of land is 5 acres. For forestry use, that would be 20 or greater acres. This is funded through reduced tax assessments and taxes. And a key requirement for us to consider is that to continue with our purchase of development rights program eligibility, we're required to have the use value taxation in agricultural and forestal districts.
I'm sorry, did you say that how long did you say the reduced taxes, how long is that in place for the?
It's for the term of the AFD. For most of the AFDs in the county, that's 4 years.
Yes, until the renewal. Okay.
Yes, some localities have it for as long as 10 years.
Have we ever looked, I'm sorry, I'll ask at the end. Go ahead.
We'll come back to that for sure.
Okay.
The next program to do a little bit of a deeper dive in is the Green Space Program. This is best for strategic situations where you might need flexibility in size, location, ownership, and it allows the county to be more proactive in reaching contacting landowners on key parcels that we might be interested in. There were discussions with previous boards and regarding what areas of the county might be most sensitive and which situations which might be most desirable for us to discuss some sort of acquisition effort with the property owner. As I mentioned previously, there had been a situation with Mainland Farm in which the county worked with the landowner to conserve a large portion of that while allowing some development outside of Mainland Farm. It can be funded in a variety of ways and has been traditionally. This current board has reenacted the real estate tax contribution toward the CIP fund. In the past, there have also been bonds used for this program. There are competitive state matching grants, which require, for example, a 50-50 match. And in some localities, they've been successful in getting donations because there are state and federal tax incentives for that. And then there are partnerships, as an example, for the Jamestown Beach Campground and Yacht Basin purchase. Dominion Power made a contribution toward that. So sometimes there are outside entities that will help you find some partnerships to make a successful purchase. One item of note regarding the green space program, and you'll see with PDR as well, is that it does require ongoing stewardship. That would be being involved in conversations about potential development on the property, being mindful of the reasons why we purchased the land and any obligations we might have through granting agencies to make sure it stays in that use. We also need to do active review of building permits, conceptual plans, grantee requests, all of which require us to look at the deeds of easement or other obligations to make sure that we're maintaining those grant terms. And then there's regular monitoring for any violations, but also to build relationships with landowners so they know who to talk to when they want to do something with their property. The PDR program is best for permanent protection where the landowner wants to retain ownership, because in all instances, the county would only have an easement. We would not have ownership of that land. Just like the green space program, this could be funded with a variety of mechanisms from real estate taxes to bonds. There is a particular opportunity with the Virginia Department of Agricultural and Consumer Services for a matching reimbursement grant, and I included some of the program eligibility documents which we could work on to be eligible for that. And there could also be private landowner donations as part of that program for funding it. This too requires ongoing stewardship, just as I mentioned before, being involved in conversations about potential development, active review of any permits, and doing regular monitoring. One note I would just do in summary is to be mindful that green space allows us a lot of flexibility and to be more proactive in certain situations. The purchase of development rights program is a bit more reactive because you're having an application period where landowners come to you and you sort through the best fit. Moving on, just wanted to let you know a bit about the current status of the green space and PDR programs. Both remain enabled through the Virginia Open Space Land Act. That was how the programs initially came about, and those that enabling authority is still there. We would be allowed to acquire property or easements for a variety of purposes, parks or recreation, land with particular natural resources, historic or scenic purposes, lands that assist in the shaping the character, direction, and timing of community development, wetlands, agricultural and forestal production. One key element is that those acquisitions must be consistent with the comprehensive plan. And so for the past 2 years, we spent a lot of time trying to set up the comprehensive plan to flow into what we might do with open space. The PDR ordinance and the committee still exist, but should we move forward with having an open application period, we will need to review the PDR ordinance to make sure it's current and reflective of best practices, and we will need to do reappointments for the committee. We are, through the Open Space Land Act, still able to fund those programs. And as I mentioned just at your last meeting, you funded the program of green space and PDR with a CIP allocation, and you had done that the previous year. We can apply for grants as situations and staff time permit. And then we have the ongoing stewardship that we are doing. We are doing upgrades to our permit link system to make sure we are more involved in new development and aware of that so that we can make sure it's meeting the terms of the deeds of easement. And we are having lots of conversations with property owners, working through their different situations. Next slide. As I mentioned in the memo and at the beginning of this presentation, and as Mr. Polster mentioned, the Natural and Cultural Assets Plan work is informing what we do with open space planning, and we have some upcoming activities that we wanted to make you aware of. We have moved through a phase of completing the natural and cultural assets maps. That is, what do we have in terms of our habitats, our agricultural and forestal land, our lands that contribute to water quality, et cetera. As the board knows, we conducted a public survey in February asking people what they loved about James City County, making sure that we were capturing those on our maps, particularly with respect to cultural and heritage assets. We received over 150 suggestions and comments, and we analyzed that input and used it to refine those natural and cultural assets maps. Now our committees are moving toward mapping the risks to those assets and thinking about strategies that might help us mitigate those risks or restore those assets. We will be taking those risk maps, the asset maps, the potential strategies out to the public, getting their reactions to them, and also soliciting new ideas. We have a community open house planned for June 29th from 4 to 7 p.m. at the Recreation Center. That will be an in-person opportunity for people to come and look at everything and talk to us and share their ideas. But we're also mindful that not everybody has the same opportunity to come in person, and so we will have some online opportunities the week before that open house, closing the week after that open house. So with that, I know that was a pretty lengthy overview, but I'll ask if you have any questions, and I'd be happy to discuss them.
Well, thank you very much for for that very expansive discussion. But I'd direct folks who are interested in these vital areas to actually consult the memorandum that you prepared for this meeting, because it is truly comprehensive and very detailed in terms of its approach to this. Appreciate very much all the information that's contained in that report. Eisner?
I had one question, and it just sort of struck me because the term, the use valuation taxation, is applying to land inside the AFD for that 4-year time period. Are there any properties that are outside of AFDs that qualify for that use value taxation, or is it only is that only associated with the AFDs?
I'll ask Mr. Holt to correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that there are lands that can qualify outside of AFDs for agricultural and horticultural use, but in order to qualify for forestry use, you must be in an AFD. Generally, they align.
So if it's a farm, they could come in and apply for that. But if it's forestry, then it has to be in an AFD. Okay, thank you. It was just an area of gray that I wasn't totally sure about. I just want to make sure I understood it a little bit better. Thank you.
I've got a few, Mr. Chair. I noticed quite a few times it was as staff time permits. And I know we're stretching our staff as tight as we can stretch them. And I know we had talked about as a board that this we would see as a position coming up to take care of these issues and items, and that's one thing. And, you know, I still think that that's a very important position. And as we move through this, it's going to be even more important because, as staff time permits, well, by the time you do all the other things you have to do, let me see if I can squeeze this one more thing. And the county administrator and I were talking earlier about, staff and trying to get a little bit more and a little bit more. And, eventually there's no more left to get. I mean, you just don't have enough time in the day. And we're low on staff as it is. So, if we were fully staffed, as staff time permits, might work. But since we're not fully staffed, as staff time permits, definitely won't work. So it's something for the board to think about as we move forward on this and how important it is and where we want to go with that. Have you thought about, I think we've discussed it before, getting a group together of the large landowners? And I know when we went through the tax process and taxing last time we went through that, and that was grueling, but the biggest thing that helped this board was we went out to all the citizens and we told them what we were going to do, how we were going to spend it, how you're going to see it, where it's going, and it worked out smooth. I'm wondering if we get the larger owners together and maybe in one meeting or two and say, this is what we're trying to accomplish. We're trying to help you. We're trying to do some relief and that sort of thing. And there's all these programs out there. Most of them probably know about it, but a lot of people say, I didn't know anything. All of a sudden, y'all just threw this on me. And so it may help in the long run as far as getting that group together and saying, hey, this is what we're trying to do. We're trying to work together. We're trying to help you out in the same process. And there's programs out there, and maybe somebody may know another program we can add into our toolbox. So just a
Yes,
thought.
thank you for those 2 points. The county did fund the position to oversee these open space programs, and that's what I've stepped into and been working on. The natural and cultural assets plan, the comprehensive plan work, presentation and today, and the steps toward changing our permit link system are all things that have been my babies, so to speak. We are thinking about ways to reach out to property owners, especially now that it looks like our programs are being funded at levels which would allow us to really follow through on acquisitions. And so I know with the recent inquiry for agricultural and forestal district property owners as to whether they might be interested in longer terms, we inquired whether they might be interested in learning more about open space preservation programs. And I did field a number of calls just from that about property owners who wanted to know what next steps might be. At that time, we didn't know what the funding situation might be with the board, and so we said, the board's interested in doing this. When we have the money available, we can do, more follow-through. And so I think there are a number of second, third generation property owners who are interested in whatever the program might be beyond AFDs. So that's an excellent idea to be able to do more education with them and outreach.
So you did hear from people that are interested in longer time for the AFD?
Those property owners who reached out to me were interested more in potential acquisition of easement issues, I think the results of the survey regarding the longer terms was more mixed, and I think the summary of it was more so that there was less interest in lengthening the terms and more comfort with staying with the existing term length.
And then I guess my only, more of a comment, and I know that, this board has definitely made a commitment in this area, but it's very, we recently had a land use case, and it was protect rural lands. It was not rural lands truly, or not all of it. And so I think it does get very difficult because we have invested some, money into protection. not necessarily in areas that are meant for other uses in the comp plan, and so people don't realize what we have done to protect. And so it's definitely, it's a difficult, it's a balance, because you may be saving a piece of land that you can afford to save. That's one thing. We have to look at affordability. We can't go after a $80 million piece of property and save it, not without some help anyway. And we have to get John to write a check for that. And but you're making an impact in other areas, and so just making people aware. So I appreciate the work, and I look forward, as we're moving forward, to getting more into it. So
Thank you for your presentation, and I really appreciated the slide with the tools that are available and who can do what and how do you react to whatever. I would reiterate that we look at other communities to see what other tools may be added to what's available here, so we're not just locked in. But to Ms. Larson's point, I would like to make sure that whatever we put out there, that the public is aware that we're not going to protect every blade of grass in this county, because people do have the right, if it's zoned a certain way, if it's in the PSA, if it's this, that, they get to do that with their property. It's the other areas that are truly rural that we're really focusing on, I think. But I just think if we have that in our publications, on our website, however we're presenting this, that we make it clear, because to Ms. Larson's point, I don't think people really are aware of the divided areas and what's what and how it's designated and how it's zoned. I just think if we have a clear, definitive statement every time we put something out, just so that people, because they may see this that came out, but they didn't see where it was listed over here. So if we keep it really concise and clear to folks, this is what we're doing, this is A, B, and C, then maybe we can keep it out in front of everyone's minds of what we're really trying to do and what's available and what's not, and what people can do and what we're looking at, because it is a balancing act. You have this that can be developed and this that we're looking to try to preserve, and whatever tools that are available. But I think communication is vital. Y'all have done a great job with that, but just keep piling it on just so that people are aware. And I would appreciate that. Thank you. That was a great presentation.
And once again, I want to reiterate my appreciation for what you've put into this presentation and the memo that we were provided for the meeting. I had a couple of questions that I was interested in. One is, has there been any consideration, have you given thought to the question of whether we benefit from having separate PDR and green space programs, or whether we might just decide, in order to make the process a little simpler, to combine those two programs?
I've given it a lot of thought over the past couple of years to think about, are there ways to streamline it? And I've preliminarily at least come to the conclusion that they really do fit different situations. And so, typically with the PDR program, you have a prescribed set of criteria and a prescribed set of easement terms. And so, for instance, you might not have any divisions of property less than 100 or 50 acres or something like that. And there may be a situation in which, or a minimum a size of property that would be eligible. And there might be situations in which the county wants to get involved with something that's a smaller size, or allow a property owner to have a limited subdivision but preserve a much larger piece. So far I've found them to be complementary. And as I mentioned, the PDR program, when you have an application cycle, perhaps on a yearly or semi-annual biannual basis, you're reacting to what property owners might bring to you, whereas you might be able to be a bit more proactive with the green space program. So I haven't quite reconciled that myself, but I do think it would be more manageable if we were able to find some areas of streamlining that. It may be that we have to focus on one versus another.
I was just curious about whether there was a benefit, I know you've given it a lot of thought, and that's, I appreciate that a lot. In terms of, because I've raised the question, Ms. Larson raised about the length of terms for the AFDs, is part of the challenge there just the fact that many of these AFDs have multiple properties that are placed in it, and while there might be an interest in some of the larger ones, for instance, in saying, well, we're not really going to do anything with this for the foreseeable future anyway, that the smaller ones maybe are less willing to kind of take that chance.
I'm not sure, and I'm not the one who's really overseeing the renewal of the AFDs, so I might invite Mr. Holt to come and speak to that.
And I was going to hop up earlier, we're certainly happy when we bring back the AFD renewals to you in September for consideration as part of our cover packet. We're going to have the results of that full AFD survey. You can start to see some of those responses yourself. If you'd like a copy to read on your summer vacation, happy to send you one sooner than later, but that work was definitely done. I think it just really goes to the uncertainty and sort of knowing that the 4-year timeline horizon sometimes is a little bit more clear in the crystal ball than a 10-year timeline horizon. Again, don't want to overgeneralize some of the responses that we got back. I think you'll start to see some of that when you get that individualized data that we send you with those survey results.
Two other quick questions for you. One is, as I understand it, there's some opportunities in some of the federal legislation, perhaps some state programs that may make money available for things like addressing water quality issues and so forth that might also tie into this notion of open space or land preservation. Are we in a good position to identify and pursue those opportunities? I think what you've indicated is that basically as staff has a chance to do that. Is this an area where there's at least some benefit to exploring the question of whether we want to talk with somebody who does this as a professional service, as consultants or the like, to help identify potential funding sources, especially in the short term as we have the infrastructure legislation and so forth that are dealing with some of these kinds of issues?
Yes, it's a good time to be doing land preservation in terms of funding that might be available. I've found that those grants are very complicated and can consume a lot of staff time to make sure that all the prep work has been done. Plus, you typically have to have some properties already in the queue, and so we have preliminarily identified in our budget some resources to allow us to reach out for grant application assistance and hopefully help us realize those grant funds in a greater way.
And what my last question really relates to a topic that I've gotten very interested in, and I think which our comp plan talks about to some extent, and that's reforestation. Where do we have an opportunity to sort of think about those kinds of issues to regenerate? I saw an article not too long ago where movement by women in Scotland about 20 years ago to plant trees has actually produced a situation where Scotland now has more trees than they had 500 years ago. And it does suggest that there are some opportunities to deal with some ways of reducing erosion, in helping to cool the planet to some degree and so forth that is really getting a lot of attention. And I think there's some programs starting to provide some funding to help kickstart them. Is that anything that we have focused on?
Not to date. I do have in my packet there, when I thought I might have a little more time, during the board meeting before this presentation, there was a new grant that came out from the forestry department. But a lot of these ideas that you all have surfaced today and areas for us to explore are things that we want to capture as we work through the natural and cultural assets mapping effort, because the culmination of that work is a list of strategies, that we can pick through and see which are the most feasible for us to move forward with. And any of these ideas, are things that I will document and roll into that process. A lot of the reforestation work that we've had to date has come from the consultant who's mentioned that those are opportunities to realize some additional value from their property, and also benefit the environment. So I think there'll be more to come from our natural and cultural assets planning effort for us to be able to highlight for property owners when we communicate out to them on our website and what have you.
Thank you. Before I'll ask for another, if any other board members have questions, let me just ask if anybody from the Planning Commission would like to ask anything while Tammy's here.
I think that even no, I don't need name. I think even with Tammy's answers, it still goes back to as staff has time permits, and I think we might maybe something we'll have to look at in the near future. And I know Tammy had a few times where when I get a minute, when I get time, you want to look into that. I want to look into this, and knowing that we're keeping it as tight as we can with staff, and I appreciate that very much. But this might be an instant where we're seeing that might take another person or more time or something to get these answers.
One thing that may help in that regard is we might want to think about the opportunities available to offer internships to college students. There's a tremendous amount of interest in topics of this kind among them of the county as they begin to see the opportunities in local government. So.
And you got a connection over there to college. You can set us up.
They're all going to have had his class anyway.
That's right.
So.
Or they should have.
I did have this. I'll send you an email. I want to ask you about the reforestation. I'm interested in what trees and things we. I don't know if we get down to that nitty gritty about telling people we don't. Okay. Pine trees are
But there are a number of local organizations that are volunteers, whether it's the Master Gardeners, or the Master Naturalists, I think the Tree Stewards, another organization that I think would be good ones to.
Supervisors acted upon a request from the property known as the Gilly property to reforest a portion of that and to allow fencing to protect the reforestation. And so I believe that was through one of the programs which benefited the property owner financially. And there are many of those. I know that the Department of Forestry also will provide advice and give additional guidance to property owners for that.
I remember years and years ago, probably before the turn of the 21st century, Will Barnes, who we celebrate annually with Will Barnes Day because of his work on the Clean County Commission, led an effort to plant 100,000 trees along the 199 corridor as that was just developing. Rosario, for the excellent presentation and lots to think about here. Our next item for discussion is the building consolidation study. And Mr. Peirce.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the board. Excited to be in front of you today. This is really the culmination of about 2.5 years of study that the county has done. You'll remember we came to you over 2 years ago where we started talking about the space needs study. And then that was really a way for staff to sort of dig in, figure out the spaces, the number of people and employees we had, and whether or not it currently met our needs. We found out that we were a little underspaced, as it were, so we sort of embarked on the next phase of that project, go in and expand those, or if we needed to look at new opportunities. Best example being the general services building. There wasn't really a good way to expand that. Facilities master plan helped us make that decision, right? So this was, like I said, the culmination where we took both those studies. We brought in Guernsey Tingle Architects and some of their subcontractors. We're going to bring them up, and they're going to give the presentation. This is the same one that you guys saw at the retreat this past year, so it shouldn't be new information. This is just sort of the final version of that. Again, this wasn't us picking a site or talking about whether or not we 100% should be in a consolidated building, but it was really facilities, or if we really should be looking at sort of that one consolidated county campus. Because one way or the other, we have to start working on things. And the further we get down one of those paths without making the decision, sort of the further we're going to be behind overall. So I'm going to bring Tom up, and I think he's going to introduce his crew.
Ms. Tingle, welcome.
Chairman McGlennon, members of the board, thank you for having us this afternoon. I have to comment on the previous presentation because I've been trying to do reforestation on my own lot in First Colony for about 30 years now, and the deer continue to take that away. So it's difficult in some places.
Program.
As Jason said, James City County engaged Guernsey Tingle, reached out to us and facility. We really looked at two scenarios, and Kyle's going to give you the methodology behind those in just a couple of minutes. First is kind of continue to do what you've been doing for the last 50 years. Stay in the existing facilities that you have, keeping administrative functions there, expanding those facilities to accommodate your current space deficiencies, and then future growth of those facilities through renovation, expansion, and so forth. The other option is consolidating those functions into a single of other properties that you could then put back on the private market, put on the tax rolls, and provide income to the county. So the study obviously looked at capital cost. What's the cost of renovation, the cost of expansion, the cost of new construction? But just as importantly, we looked at operational costs. What does it take to operate the existing facilities that you're in versus a consolidated location? We teamed with RKG and Associates out of Alexandria to lead the modeling scenarios and the fiscal impact study. I'm going to introduce you to the president of RKG here in a moment. We also engaged the services of RJS and Associates in Williamsburg to look at market valuations of the county's real estate assets that could be vacated and sold if you made that decision. Out of Virginia Beach, Clark Nixon actually helped us model energy usage and operational usage for a potential consolidated future facility. I would like to give credit to department heads that we worked with, but especially to your general services staff, Grace Boone and Sean Gordon, who gathered volumes of information on operational cost, energy costs, maintenance reserve forecasts, and when they thought they were done, we said we need more. And it really was a collaborative process over a period of about 90 days earlier this year. As some of Tammy's previous projects that she mentioned, Jamestown Marina, Jamestown Beach Campsite, Chickahominy, Kyle was part of the Shaping Our Shores master plan. So he's familiar with the county, and he's going to run you through the methodology and our findings, and then we'll open it up for questions and comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm not exactly sure what you need me for. Tom basically encapsulated it in a nutshell. So thank you for that, Tom. It made my job a little bit easier. Yes, have worked in James City County, Williamsburg a number of times into the region, and so it's always wonderful, not just from a professional perspective, but from a personal perspective to get back here. I don't want to bore you with a lot of the details. I know you've heard this before. Tom did just give a very good encapsulation of it, but just to kind of walk you through the intent, the methodology, and the findings. And if you have any more detailed questions for me, I'm happy to respond to those. Obviously, as the previous study that Tom mentioned talked about is you are under-spaced for even the staffing that you have, let alone the staffing that you're going to potentially need. I think that's a very timely discussion around this topic of discussion, because you do have 40 years. You can see the numbers up there. I don't need to repeat them. And so the idea here is to try and identify what the fiscal impact would be of the two scenarios that Tom described. Do we continue with our existing facilities and expand as we need, or do we try and find a consolidated location and bring those core services together under a single roof and try and benefit from the efficiencies that are created by that? Whoops. Okay, why are you not helping me out here? There we go. And so the approach that we took, obviously, there were 7 locations, 7 different departments that were considered here. This facility here, Mounts Bay Road, Ironbound Village on Palmer Lane, the 3 facilities that you have there, the Fire Administration Building property, that did not include Fire Station 1, just the Fire Administration Building side of it, the IR to the County Administration, the Human Services Center facility, and then the Williamsburg, James City County, the School Administration Annex Building, not the school that it's on the property of, but the operations that are in those facilities. And as Tom mentioned, and I don't need to repeat this again, but we wanted to make sure that you understood what your both capital investments to do for those 2 options, as well as the operational changes that came out of it. And to reiterate, Tom, is Grace and Sean were pivotal. I'm sure they're not here information. And the most important point behind that is we wanted to make sure that we were using data that was relevant to James City County. Oftentimes when you do these types of analyses, you use regional data or national data, and that gives you a sense or an idea, but it may not necessarily relate specifically to the operations of the community that you're working in. And the fact that we're talking about 7 different locations, and even here at Mounts Bay Road, 5 different buildings, when we engaged with your staff, when we engaged with your department heads and understanding the operational inefficiencies of having to walk outside and walk close to a quarter of a mile to get to talk to somebody that you need to do 3 to 4 times a day, it really was important we had that local relevant information so that the analysis got as accurate as it could be. And so I just wanted to reiterate that is because we really tried to drill down to James City County specific. And so all the information here, to the best that we can, is the capital cost of construction, right? You have to renovate your existing spaces, you have to build the new expansions of those existing spaces in the one scenario, and then we're building a whole new facility with the consolidated scenario. We looked at operational, and like I mentioned, it's not just about what does it cost to pay for power, what does it cost to maintain the buildings, but how many fewer vehicle miles are traveled in county vehicles because we don't have to drive between facilities? How many hours of staff time are going to be saved because I only have to walk down a hall rather than having to get in my car and drive over to talk to somebody? And so we took into account all that information when we did these analyses, and I'll show you the numbers that come out of the back end of it. But we really wanted it to be a comprehensive look at the differences between those 2 options, because all too often communities focus in on just what is the cost of construction, one versus the other, but that truly doesn't reflect not necessarily the strengths of the other. We kind of talked about this. Bob's group was invaluable to us because under the consolidated scenario, there were a number of properties that were considered for disposition. Obviously not the school site, right, because it's on the campus of a school and not the IRM, but there were a number of, I think there were 3 sites that we looked at that we needed to understand, well, what is the value of those to the marketplace, and then what type of uses would occur on those properties so that we could understand what kind of cash infusion we can have to help defray the cost of construction, and then what are going to be the economic and fiscal impacts of those properties operating privately. Obviously, right now, being county-owned, they don't generate tax revenue, the full look. So here is the existing facility scenario of what it can pertain. And so on the first column is the current square footage of each of those 7 facilities that we talked about. And then the next column is what would the square footage need to be by 2040 or 2040, correct, Tom? Based on your current space needs that are unmet, as well as the projected future space needs for these different departments. And you can see it's about a 70,000 or so square foot differential of what you have today to what you would need. And so then we looked at, well, do we rehab the space that we already have? Yes or no? And then what are the costs of that rehabilitation? Are we looking for new construction on top of that existing space? Yes or no? And then did we sell the property because we no longer needed it for county operations? Yes or no? And you can see here, I mean, and effectively, under the existing condition scenario, we keep all the facilities, we renovate them to get them to so that they are aesthetically and technologically consistent with the additions that we're doing for those properties. And then we are building, obviously, the new space on there. For the consolidation scenario, obviously, it's much different. We have all the existing facilities, but we are moving into a single consolidated facilities and no longer operating the 7 county departments collective of the 7 facilities under the rehab. And that's because we're able to create an efficiency in terms of shared space. Stuff like data storage rooms, conference rooms, meeting rooms. By co-locating those facilities, we don't have to have a conference room for each one of those 7 entities. We could have maybe 3 conference rooms of different sizes that they can then timeshare, because what we learned through the process was those rooms weren't always used 100% of the time. And so the first efficiency we get is having to have a smaller footprint, because then we can save space based on having them all located in the same location. And you can see here this property where we're standing now, the Ironbound Village properties and the Human Services Facility are the ones that would be considered for disposition. EOC would be rolled and into the ECC facility and potential for expansion there, which they have needs as well, which weren't considered in this study. The Fire Administration building wasn't sold because it was going to be used for expansion of Firehouse 1, and so that property would remain and address, I believe, some ingress-egress issues there. Campus. I will say, as before we go too far, this looks at the needs of those 7 specific departments and facilities only. The study was much more comprehensive in all the departments in the county, and those would still need to be done outside of this, but they're not part of this assessment, because whether you do a consolidation of these 7 or you don't, those costs don't change. And so that doesn't impact the fiscal analysis that we're doing, because those need to happen whether we do this or we don't. So just to make sure you understand why we're only focusing in on these 7 facilities, these 7 departments. County staff and the consulting team, but you do have to make some assumptions so you'll be able to do the analysis. The renovation and new construction all starts in 2024. Obviously, it takes time to get things up and running, and so we couldn't assume it was all going to happen today. The disposition of the facilities would occur in 2027, which is after construction is completed, the relocation has happened, and now those properties are available for sale. And the reason why the years matter is because we look at this over a longitudinal period, and we have to then use the time value of money, inflation, to be able to then give you a true comparison of the value. So if you sell a facility today or you sell a facility 5 years from now, you have to know what the price of it's going to be. And when you do it, because you have to compare it, it's important to us, because we had to make sure we understood when these investments were going to be made and how. And then, the consolidated space, as I mentioned already, has the potential for reduction in space needs. And so that had to be factored into it as well. The other reason why these dates are important is you already have a repair and capital improvements program in place for the 7 existing facilities. And so we had to have a cutoff date where the ones that were planned for 5 years from now, we're not going to make those investments, right? We had to consider the ones that we still had to make while we're continuing operating there, but we also understand, well, the ones that were scheduled for 2026, we're not going to include those in our analysis because now we don't need to make those because we're no longer going to be occupying that building. So we really wanted to drill down to understand the apples to apples comparison here, rather than just try and give lump sum numbers. As I mentioned, the cost factors were all held to $2022, even though some of this expenditures are going to be made into the future. We depreciated them back to today's value so that we have an apples to apples comparison. One of the other big things that was part of the conversation was trying to be more efficient with the land we use for the consolidated concept. And so what the analysis looked at was 50% of the parking spaces at this new facility would be in a structured parking structure. And so that is important to understand because the cost of a structured parking space is substantially greater than the cost of a surface lot space. And so that did add to the cost of construction. However, it also created benefits. First off, when you park outside in the rain, you can park in the structure and walk under cover. You don't have to get wet. The other thing is it also allows for the potential for security and to be able to have a secure place to park cars in this structure. Ingress and egress can be monitored as opposed to a surface lot. And so there was benefits that it created, but it's also important to understand that we did incur a substantially greater cost trying to get a more efficient land use out of it. The design will ensure integrity of use and access. There were, in conversations with our department heads, some of the folks had concerns about like having separate entrances or what type of security. And so we wanted to make sure that the analysis we did took those into consideration. And the last piece I will say is we wanted to retain existing levels of service. And this is one that Sean and Grace and I went back and forth on a lot. Is the reality is if the county is mowing lawns once every 2 weeks now, we had to model it that they were mowing lawns once every 2 weeks after this. So we had to make sure that the level of service stayed the same. Now, the reality is when you go from 7 different facilities to 1, you could probably actually increase services, the level of service, without increasing costs because you're now getting more efficient. But to be fair to both strategies, we wanted to make sure that we were looking at it as if we kept the same level of service for the county between the 2 different results. In terms of the results of this, I've already talked about this, so I don't need to belabor it. The one point I will say is just to show you the difference in cost of a new constructed surface space as opposed to a structured space, and so why you see some of the capital costs for the consolidated facility to be much, much higher is we tried to go to a more efficient approach. The next thing I wanted to bring up that I haven't talked about yet is energy efficiency. Obviously, the county has a requirement for LEED certification for new facilities, and Clark Nexon was part of the team, and they built their own model to model out what the energy usage, both water and electricity, water, sewer, and electricity would be based on those standards as opposed to existing buildings that are 50 some odd years old. And I will say, it's fairly substantial when you move into a new building. The analysis that Clark Nexon and we did together showed over a 20% improvement over current operations in a mental perspective. And how does our current operations impact our footprint in the community as opposed to the consolidated one? And so that was one of the big things I think was intriguing to us. The big ticket savings truly was water usage. Based on their analyses, going to a new facility where we have reduced the number of restrooms and we have increased the efficiency of those restrooms could reduce almost 70 to 80% of the water consumption of what we're consuming right now in these facilities as opposed to a consolidated. I thought that was very interesting. Finally was the intra-office energy savings based on interviews with your department heads, up to a 15% reduction in vehicle miles traveled for these 7 departments by having them co-located and putting it in a more centralized location within the county as opposed to where they are now. And while we calculated a value in terms of the maintenance on the fleet and how many vehicles we needed and the consumption of gasoline, which when we did this analysis wasn't $5.89 a gallon. So it probably would be even greater now than what it was when we did the analysis. But the reality is there are also economic values and benefits that come out of a consolidated strategy, not just the dollars and cents of it all. So the existing facilities, the biggest differentials here, the cost of construction and rehab, was somewhere in the, if I'm doing this math in my head quickly, about $92 million between rehabbing the existing space and the new construction of the space, and then obviously land development because we still have to build these new spaces. There's cost there. The biggest differential that I will say is between your existing operating costs and your expanding operating costs of maintaining those facilities jumps up quite substantially from about $700,000 a year to almost $900,000 a year. And that's not terribly surprising, right? Because we didn't gain any efficiencies and reducing the number of facilities. We did increase the amount of square footage, which is going to cost more to maintain and clean. And so there was a jump up there in the cost to maintain those facilities. When we built our model out over a 30-year period, we measured for 30 years. Bringing it back into today's dollars, it would be about a $91.3 million cost to the county to continue operating your facilities, expand them, and then run them over the next 30 years. In comparison, the cost of, the previous cost, I'm sorry, I'm going to go back for a moment. I'm sure I shouldn't, but the overall rehab construction cost was about $65 million, okay, as opposed to $99 million for the new for the consolidated facility. And that's because there's such a cost differential between how much it costs to rehab a square foot as opposed to build a new square foot. However, the impact of that is somewhat mitigated by the sale of those properties we talked about. Particularly this property right here had an estimated value that ranged, and I'm probably getting the numbers wrong, between like 11 and 18 million dollars. And so we took the midpoint of the analysis, was about 14.4 million dollars, the value of this complex sold for private development. And so that would defray some of that cost. But the biggest differential for us was, even though we expanded space and even though we had a larger building footprint, our operational costs actually stayed about the same because of all the efficiencies that we gained. The other thing that came out of it is the next to last line, which is the net fiscal impact of the private development based on the estimated uses of those three properties. It is projected to create about $98.7 million. So higher, about 8 or so % higher than the existing facilities analysis. And I'll put them up here right next to each other so you can see the differences between the two. But once again, the other component that I want to talk about, especially from that impact of the private development, was the creation of almost 1,000 jobs. Of the existing space here and the existing space that was created, it would create almost 1,000 new private sector It would create almost 1,000 new private sector jobs by repurposing those three facilities for private use rather than continue to use them as county. And so not only are you creating effectively a similar financial impact to the county, a fiscal impact to the county, there's economic benefits that would be created by those investments between the jobs that are created and also all the households that were projected to be part of a residential development around this office complex here on this property. And if I remember correctly, and I'm speaking off the top of my head, that created about the demand of additional $5 million of retail, locally captured retail sales. So it would benefit your existing retailers. And that the sales tax numbers aren't included in this. That's an indirect impact. We just wanted to focus on the direct impact of this in the fiscal analysis. And so in summary, from our perspective, while the consolidated strategy does create a slightly higher cost over the 30 years, net out, mostly because of the cost of construction, a lot of that is borne in the 16 or so million dollars in the structured parking deck. And the reason why that's important to understand is because while we are creating a location that more suits the aesthetics of this county. You were talking earlier, for example, about design guidelines for your B1 district. Having a modern, well-done facility will have different than kind of the generational differences of the 7 buildings that we have right now. And it would also will have a net positive fiscal impact of the private sector development, the economic impact of those jobs and those households that are created, and also an environmental impact, the positive impact of reducing our carbon footprint, reducing the consumption of resources that the county does to do its day-to-day operations. And so that, in a nutshell, was the analysis. I hope I didn't take too long, Tom. I apologize if I did. And there's a lot more information that can be shared that's a whole lot more boring that you can read if you're having trouble sleeping at night. But I'm happy to answer any questions you may have about this.
Thank you, Mr. Salenti. Anybody have questions, Mr. Eisner?
Could you go back one to that comparison slide, number 18 there? 18, right there. So I follow through everything on this. When you get down to the existing operational costs for both sides and expanded operational costs, those are annual figures, and that you have projected it out over a 30-year period, but adjusted for inflation. Is that correct? So it's adjusted back to $22.
Yes, so that would be the annual cost adjusted back to $22, $22 on average.
Okay. And then the question I had over here on this, the reversion value is just what we get in the way of for what we sell those 3 assets for.
Yes.
And then the net fiscal impact. The one question I had on that is this particular location, which would be predominantly residential, although some may be commercial or whatever. That we have found that does that consider the fact that most of our housing is usually, if you do just a straight housing, it's net negative because of school kids and costs and stuff like that, or How did this, given the fact that this would probably be a pretty large residential development, how does that square with the net fiscal of a third of $1 million a year, projected out in the future?
Sure. So this includes all three properties, right? So the office, in our scenario, the office here remains.
Yeah.
The Office of Ironbound Village, the Office of the Human Services Center continue to operate. And so they have their fiscal impact. I actually used the county's fiscal impact model.
Okay.
And then I plugged in values based on similar values of this area. So the cost, the value of the homes that would likely be built here based on the value of this area was plugged into that model.
Okay.
We plugged into the model the average student generation created in this area. So I kind of took a look at, all right, what is this area doing? And I superimposed it upon what the new residential development that would be built here, assuming they would be a similar output. And by doing that, that's what allowed us to create the fiscal impact analysis. And so in this area, you have a slightly lower student generation rate than your model or your county average is. You also have a substantially higher per unit value rate in this area. And so those do impact that calculation. So I took your model and I customized it. Once again, we tried to be as site-specific, as community-specific as we possibly could. And we said, well, if the houses around here are worth X number of dollars per unit, it is highly unlikely someone's going to come in and build units that are 1/3 of that or 1/4 of that. So we wanted to make sure that we were getting as close to what we believe reality would be here as we could based on the data that was available to us, both provided by the county and that we were able to do analysis on and find information around. So that's how we get to that number.
Okay, thank you.
Now, it looks like to me, regardless of which way we were to go, we're going to spend almost the same amount.
Very close.
And we can repair and fix and maintain the old buildings and have an old building with a new addition, or we can have a new building. And, and one thing I noticed that hidden in here is, and it may be hidden in here with all the information you have, and it's very well done. But I know when we have any major emergency, and what happens is we have a major emergency, we'll meet at the EOC or something, we'll all take off, everybody will go down to the EOC, plan what's happening, this storm's coming in, it's category 1, maybe hit, maybe not, and they plan everything out. And then they all leave, and the next day we come and have a second meeting. At 8 a.m., the storm's changed to a category 3, and that's a big deal, and it's due to hit us or close to us, and what do we do? And then we have a meeting at 3 o'clock, and so we have one at 8, and then everybody goes back and tells staff, here's what's going on, and then we have another one at 3 because we have to adjust some things and do that, where if we're in one building, it's more of hit the elevator and go to floor 3 or 2 or whatever floor would be. And, it's all that, and I'm sure the travel time and wear and tear in vehicles and maintenance and all can't be figured really into that because those are specialty things that go on. But I know that is a cost in there that we would not have being in one building where we would hit the button and
Yeah, so we did the best we could on mathing out those types of impacts for like the use of county vehicles and calculating that because there are numbers around it. But yes, the saved staff time, we tried to quantify a sense of it, but you can't put it into a fiscal analysis, right? Because it's not an expense. You don't spend more for it. You lose productivity, but you don't lose hard dollars, if that makes any sense.
Right.
But so yes, and so that was part of that analysis when we talked to the different department heads, because it wasn't just going to the EOC and back. It was, Human Services has to come meet with the county administrator. Well, then they have to get in their car and drive over here, and then they drive back, and that's during business hours. Well, there goes 30 minutes of productivity that, if I have a minute here or there, Well, sometimes those minutes are spent on getting in my car and driving to go to a meeting I need to be at.
Right, and that's what we were talking about earlier, we keep staff as tight as possible.
Yes.
But sometimes they're having to run back and forth where if they're in one building and I asked one of the members years ago, I said, this person's getting ready to retire. Do you know them? I said, well, no, not really. I know them, but they've been here 29 years, but I don't really know them. And where one building, as many as we could have in one building, all of them wouldn't go into one building. But if we put all these, then that puts more connectivity to our staff and gives them a chance to, be able to communicate with each other and see each other in the elevator, on the steps, or maybe out walking the track or something, or wherever we end up being. I'm sure there'd be some type of walking facility around there for staff. And it would give them more time to, because a lot of them, you think, well, you work in James City County, but they're working so much in one building here and someone else is over in Palmer, and they may know them, but they never connect because the travel time, and they've got their job they're doing, and we try to work them as hard as we can. They'll tell you.
Well, and I will say, if I've learned nothing from our company's own perspective through this whole COVID situation of working remotely and not being able to be together, the dissemination of information, the sharing of knowledge, the organic conversations about how to become more effective and efficient stop happening. And so I couldn't even begin to try and value if you had everybody co-located where they see each other from different departments on a regular basis, either passing by in the hallway or having lunch at the same time, how that could also benefit that engagement. Yes, I think that's a completely legitimate perspective where we can't financially value, we can economically value it, but we can't financially value it, but is legitimate, it's real. Because I can tell you the loss of productivity we had and the loss of information dissemination for me to my staff, for example, of them when they used to just be able to pop their head in my office and say, hey, Kyle, how do you do this? What resources do we use to this? Or where do you go find that? Where now, if it's video, or they're less likely to want to bother me because it's much more of an inconvenience to have to video conference than it is to just stick your head through my door.
Right.
So there is a tremendous efficiency that is very challenging to calculate of being co-located.
And I think another thing is the citizens, where Sue and I are living, it's a half hour at the quickest to get to this facility and a half hour to go back. So there's
$5 a gallon.
Yeah. And, centrally located, wherever that would be, more centrally located would help. But also, it would help me as a citizen if I can go there and get as many items in one place. Yeah, I want to pay my taxes. I want to pay my water bill. I want to, whatever, would fit in here. I want to ask code and compliance a question. I'm thinking about putting a fence up or something where I can go to one building and cover 3 or 4 things rather than go, no, where are they located? Build what? D, C, D, and where is A? I don't even know where A is. And so a lot of times that's confusing. It's worked well for us, and it's been a good plan up to this point. There's nothing wrong with what is, our facilities or what's going on with them. But a new facility, I think, would really benefit us in the.
Well, to your point, there's good and there's better. We have good, but there is better.
Yeah.
So I agree.
Other questions?
I just look forward to the discussion moving forward.
Yeah. I guess I'd be curious to know. I mean, having had an opportunity to think about this for a while and see some of the discussion, it does appear to me to be the case that some consolidation of our facilities is a good idea. That we want to recognize the fact that there are always going to be some limitations on that. That there are physical locations that have to be dispersed for certain kinds of services like fire and the like, but that it makes sense for us to try to think about a central location for most of our county services, and I think this is helpful in seeing the ways in which you can accomplish that at fairly comparable costs to renovating. I still kind of wonder about the question of, when we get to that point, will we have met our needs for essentially the 50 years where we are now from the movement here compared to maybe already being straining by 2040, given population growth, increased services, and the like. But I guess my inclination is to think that we're probably going to be looking at a single facility or a consolidated facility.
One question that I had that I wrote it down but forgot to ask was, you didn't specifically mention school administration. Was school administration designed as part of that to be moved into the central facility, or was that not part of the scope of this?
Yes, so the school administration, all the operations in the administration building and the annex building will be part of the
Part of the new
centralized.
facility?
Yes.
Okay, all right. I wasn't totally clear on that. I wanted to make sure. Thank you.
How does the school to me, that makes sense, but do we get a sense of how the school system feels about that?
Ms. Larson, I think what I would tell you, it depends on location, and you've talked sort of Long Hill to War Hill, and I think the school administration would be appreciative of a new facility. For them, location is probably equally important to what it is for this board in terms of access to the citizens and residents, in their case, students and parents. But yes, I think they would want to know where it is, and I think that they will, you're the primary funder of where they go. I think they would be happy to move, and they have identified in their 5 to 10 year CIP the need for a school administration complex or building. So they have that need in the future as well.
Any other
Do we
comments?
need, I guess we need direction for staff to move forward on the, does that need to be a motion? Do I need to bring a motion forward, or to get staff for a direction of, okay, are we rehabbing or are we building a new building so we're not wasting any funds as far as staff goes to?
I guess my feeling is we're probably close to that point, but maybe not right at it today. I guess I'd like to get a sense that whether people think, all things being equal, we're looking at a consolidated site for the county and schools, or whether there's still interest in considering the rehab option. But I think we have a couple other pieces we need to talk about relating to what that consolidation is going to look like, what we're going to be able to do in terms of being able to recover some of the cost through disposal of county properties and things of that nature.
And I would think that would, once we get staff direction in the direction we want to move, then they would bring all that, to us and help us work through what, when, where, how. I'm not thinking we would say, hey, this is exactly what we want today. It would be more of option A would be a new structure, and option B would be rehabbing all the old structures that we have. And at least, County Administrator, I hate to put you on the spot, but would that be something that, that's going to help in the direction that we're going to want to go? Because, we have to give you direction on, this is the path that we like to pursue, and then you would help lead us through that process.
Mr. Hipple, I appreciate being put on the spot. That's part of the role of this job from time to time. But I would tell you, it's up to the board. It's a big decision. So from where I sit, I don't want to rush you, but we need the space really today and certainly into the next 20, 30 years. And so if you want to give direction today that we want a consolidated facility, bring back a plan of what that would look like and how we go, there's still, for me, a lot of decision points to get there. Where does it go? What exactly in there? How do we lay it out? All those things that you work through as part of that process. If you're ready to say, we think we need a consolidated facility today, fine, we get started that much earlier. If you wait 2 weeks, in a 4 or 5 year kind of program, that probably doesn't hurt us. If you wait till September, all those things get harder in terms of saving costs. You know, in our budget this year, we deferred some maintenance costs at this facility, about $600,000 that we really had intended to do. Well, if we're not going to make that decision for another 6 months, then some of those things become a little more critical at the end of that 5 year period that we might be able to leave this complex. So I don't want to rush you in the decision because it's big. What you decide, if you say a consolidated facility today is the direction you want to head, that's not a final decision, but at least would provide us that direction to start assembling our plan and our resources and getting some other steps in place, because we'll need some outside help to look at a site and make sure that site works and some other steps along the way.
I guess for me, before I were to, I don't have an issue with taking a straw type vote on, yes, let's move forward with consolidation or no. But I'm interested in the place. Like, I don't know that I'm necessarily want to sign off on something if I have no idea where, or I say yes, and then it goes in some place that I'm not the least bit interested in having a office building. So how do you marry the two? Because I do think that there, and I had said something to you previously, because I do think often the message gets lost, and this has got a huge price tag to it. So does the other, and maintaining, band-aiding, that's got a huge, it's going to be spent. How it's going to be spent is the question, really. But I think you really have to, I think you have to really take that message into consideration. And when people are upset, when the headline is the price tag versus all the other information that goes behind it, I think that's what we have to be prepared to discuss and back up, etc. So those are my comments.
So can we decide consolidate or rehab without knowing the location now, that's the route we want to go, and then we can figure out where on another discussion? Is that based on what's available?
I would offer, because that's one of the concerns I've had, is that I would offer that it may, on a personal level, it may make a difference. Because if the while I may lean toward consolidation, and it makes good sense, because as Ruth says, the price tag is about the same regardless one way or the other. So, we're going to have to fight that battle anyway. But if we wind up doing a consolidated facility, to be quite honest with you, if it's a consolidated facility in what I consider to be the wrong location, I'm not sure that I wouldn't prefer the other option. So I'm a little reluctant to say, yeah, let's go this way, until we have a little more certainty about what we're going to do. And I sympathize, because staff needs to know something fairly quickly.
So do we need to pick a location
we
first?
need to narrow the locations, I think, and to look at what the options are. And I think that's something we need to do in a very short order.
Yeah, because the costs are just going to keep going up.
See, I disagree with that, because first we need to decide what we're going to do. And then we need the professionals to help us, lead us in the direction of, we don't know if we pick a spot and we say, we'd love to have it here. And all of a sudden they come back in 6 months and say, it won't fit.
Yeah,
So now we've wasted 6 more months.
right.
And that's something that this board will decide, just like how many floors, how big, does it have a parking garage, does it not have a parking garage? We can save 14 million if we don't do the parking garage. Those are all decisions we'll make as we go along, that we'll have to look at different facilities, how different areas work, how quickly it can be built, how quick a team can be put together, and all that. And the team will guide us in those decision-making and get us. It's like picking a county administrator. I mean, you know, and I'm not picking on you.
That was a lot
But
of
you know,
fun.
we've done it and it's tough. It's a lot of, I don't know, maybe,
But
yeah,
we did a
kind of.
good job.
We did. And I think we'll do a good job on this. It'll be compromise. And that's why I'm saying, you know, first we need to decide, okay, then consolidated building or rehabbing and get the process and then give staff a chance. Cause you know, 600,000 of this building can be put to the new or the rehab. And, but we don't want to spend money on things if we're gonna not, we can Band-Aid and hold things. We don't have to replace a roof if we got a couple of shingles messed up. We can fix the shingles and save on the cost of repairing or replacing a whole roof. So it's those things. So I'm not looking anywhere about placement, size, structure, any of that. We're looking at costs are the same, pretty much, and which way we go. And we go.
Let me ask, Scott, if you were to get a decision today that said we're going to go consolidated, how quickly would you be able to come back to us and tell us, okay, here are our sites A, B, C, D, and E, or whatever. Here are the costs. You know, here are the footprints. This kind of stuff. How quickly are we talking about getting things ginned up? Because then the question becomes, if a lot of that's going on, because I know a lot of that's going on in the background right now anyway, and I'm not sure, you know, whether or not it wouldn't be beneficial for us to wait 2 weeks or 4 weeks to make that final decision where we had a little bit further information on it.
Yeah, Mr. Eisenhower, I think you're right. We've had enough conversation with the board to at least know there's some opportunity for us to be looking. As we get into the board saying, yes, we really believe consolidated facility is the way we want to go. You haven't made a final decision, but you've given that direction. We'll start spinning up more specifics on these sites and getting probably a consultant to help us lay it out and make sure it fits, whether it's structured parking or surface parking. Start developing some very high level estimates at each site so you can give you the pros and cons, not only of location, but of cost and utility availability and those kinds of things and site availability. Because there may be a 20-acre parcel that is physically there, but we don't have the ability to own it for a reasonable period of time. So those are considerations for sites. Concurrently, there's a lot of ongoing effort. If you say, hey, we believe we're going to do it, you're going to want to visit, I think, other boardrooms. You're going to want to see some facilities that are out there. So finding a design professional, some of those things could run concurrently where we're shaving off some of that design time. If we wait for everything to go linear, what could be a 2-year process is probably 3 or 4 before you start construction. So all those things I think you're going to want to see. 2 weeks, I don't think is significant. 2 months, 3 months, 9 months, I think that does start impacting what happens at the other end of us. So again, it's a big decision, but for me, it's direction today. It's not a final decision on building or not, but it would spin us up a little more if you say we really are interested in that, whether it's a motion or not, to send us that direction today or in a few weeks, I think would work on our side.
So I just say that, you know, I'm not hearing a lot of people arguing that consolidation, or that the renovation is the better path to follow. What I'm hearing is that consolidation seems to make sense, but it is heavily dependent on location. And so that ought to, I think, give you some direction in the sense of saying, yeah, we want to see now what that would mean in terms of location of facility, size and structure that would be permissible in different locations and so forth. And we can move ahead on those things, just with the sense that unless I'm misreading my colleagues, and I don't think I'm hearing anybody argue that we would be better off renovating existing facilities and expanding some of them, acquiring new facilities in scattered locations as well. That's really, I think, guidance that can be used to start the process.
Just to reiterate from what I was seeing, the rehab or consolidation is basically a wash on the grand scheme of things. Okay.
Actually, if my understanding was correct, you said the parking was about 16 million. So that the net result is if you did all surface parking, it would actually be cheaper to do it in the long run. And but you're doing the excess, a little bit of excess because of that. There were compelling reasons to be doing it.
Would there be more room for growth with a consolidation process?
I think any site we look at, we would look at growth, whether it's additional
Yeah, that-
stories, whether it's more buildings.
Yeah.
But yes, we want to make sure we're looking forward as well.
We don't have to be
I was gonna
redoing
say,
this
I
again in
thought about
5
that
years.
as well. That needs to be factored into your site analysis because, God knows what people are gonna wanna do in 2040. It won't be my problem, but,
Could be a wing or.
yeah. Or like I said, just put another 3 or 4 stories on top of it for my.
Stick them up there.
Well, that would be, just be teleporting, so, we're not too much. Anyway, well,
I
so,
was just gonna see if Mr. Tingle, because he stepped up, I didn't know if he was gonna say something else to us.
You got to the conclusion without my help, so very good. And back to.
We
comment
tried.
We do that well.
Mr. Eisenhower just said, so structured parking, we did a test fit of a site. Pick a site anywhere, it really makes no difference. A test fit, it takes about 10 acres. If you went to all surface parking, it's up to 15 or 16 acres. So, you don't know where the home of this facility is until the staff can help you make some decisions about what makes the most sense. So I think the direction you're headed is the right one. Thank you.
all right. So we, I think provided you with direction.
Some direction, yes, sir.
right.
Thank you. We won't stop
It
talking
just
about
started.
it.
That's right, that's right. But I do think that, there is this concern. I think there's a recognition that consolidation makes a lot of sense, but that it has to be at the right spot. Okay, with that, we will then move on. We have a board consideration in front of us this afternoon, which is the contract with Williamsburg James City Schools and City for the Williamsburg James City County Schools with the City of Williamsburg. And Mr. Stevens.
Mr. Chair, members of the board, we are presenting a resolution and a contract for this joint school contract between James City County and the City of Williamsburg. The last contract period was from fiscal year 2017 to the end of fiscal year 22, so that's upon us. We've been working on this new contract since last fall, and we've had a number of conversations with you and then with the City of Williamsburg. And the negotiated contract uses our existing contract for joint operation of the schools as our baseline and modifies the agreement in a few areas. And specifically, those 3 areas are establishing a future school use account in which each locality would deposit their respective amount of 90% of the year-end balance from the school system, where before we had that process in the fall, and by December we're asking you to approve a $2 to $4 million expenditure. It sort of felt rushed. Talking with the city, it seemed to make sense for us to put those funds aside for the school system's benefit, 90% of those funds, and then they would be incorporated back into our normal budgeting process. If the school division had an emergency need for those funds, they could approach us with that emergency need, but they wouldn't be trying to spend all of that excess fund in a short period of time and rush you to a decision. It would let it go through our normal budget process. And if you didn't spend up that money in any current year during the budget process, it would just stay in that fund for future school use, really subject to your approval in the future. And so again, the city felt like that was a good change. We did as well from our finance side. The sales tax for education would be a direct distribution to the school division. We really made that change in FY22. It's incorporated in FY23. This was just codifying that in our agreement. And then the final thing was approval of an annual budget. Capital improvement projects and the hiring of a superintendent would require a supermajority, meaning an affirmative vote of 5 of the 7 members of the school board. And those were the significant changes. We did provide copies of that contract to you previously that showed sort of the marked up version, but I think it incorporates at least the intent of what we had discussed as a board and what the city council had adopted at their meeting just over a week and a half ago. So they have adopted the contract. If you have questions, I would be happy to address those. This contract period is July of 22 through July of 27 or end of June 27. And I'd recommend adoption, again, subject to questions or concerns you may have.
Yeah, the only question I had was this one you placed at our table, which had the actual resolution. When you get down to the resolution, now therefore be it resolved, it basically starts out that effective July 1st, 2017. Should that have been corrected to 2022 or? On page 2, right under the word resolution?
Yes, sir.
Is that? Because I noticed that as you go through, that a lot of the paragraphs have dates that are reference to earlier contracts that I guess just continue carrying on. But I was trying to make sure that
Yes, sir. I think that's a good correction to that. Adam, you have a different opinion? Yeah, I think we're good with that.
Okay.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments?
The only other question I had is that we have made this change to the requirement of the voting. How does the school board get brought into that, that's the way it goes? Or do they just vote and then if it doesn't work out that way, it doesn't pass?
You know, Ms. Larson, I think we've got to work with them to ask them to honor that, put it maybe part of their bylaws, but it's certainly an expectation of the funding entities. And if they wouldn't honor that, you ultimately control the funding source that's a majority of their budget.
No,
So
I realize that.
we'll
It's
communicate
more
that.
like, how are we going to let them know that this is a change?
I will communicate that to the superintendent and send this contract to them so they have that as well, and ask that she share that
Okay.
with her board along with those changes.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Any other discussion, questions? If not, do I have a motion?
I'll move the motion.
Motion to approve the school contract? Mr. Stevens, call the roll, please.
Motion as amended, Ms. Larson?
Oh, yes.
Motion as amended.
Thank you. Mr. Hippel?
Aye.
Mr. Eisenhower?
Aye.
Ms. Sadler?
Aye.
Ms. Larson?
Aye.
Mr. McGlinnan?
Aye.
Motion carries.
Great. Okay, we now come to board requests and directives. Mr. Eisenhower? Request the board finish up quickly so you can get on your plane?
I will be reachable primarily by email or text. If you call me, it costs me $10 a day.
We're not calling.
But I catch an airplane tomorrow. I'll be back on the 11th of June.
Have a good time. Enjoy yourself.
Safe travels.
Yes. Nothing to report. I'll move it along quickly.
I just report very quickly that we attended the VACO Region 2 and 3 meeting, Chair McGlinnan and the county administrator and myself, and I thought it was a really good meeting. The other thing that I would like to bring forward is this past weekend, there was an accident at the corner of Green Springs and the Main, and there was a fatality. And my deepest sympathy to all the families involved in that accident. Since I've been on this board, there have been several requests for a speed change on Green Springs Road. It currently is at 45 miles an hour. I know that VDOT has been unwilling to look at the speed in the past, realizing that there are a lot of different factors that go into accidents, etc. That road is especially difficult because it has a tree canopy. It's very hard. It's very difficult. It happened to me on Monday. If there is a car that is dark colored, green colored, it is very hard to see. It gets very washed out. I know that there's been questions and calls into VDOT by several neighborhoods. There are a lot of neighborhoods that empty onto that road. About the speed, I had someone approach me, ask if it was possible for a sign to go up that said lights on, because just putting on your headlights on that strip makes cars a lot more visible. I don't know if that's possible. It is very difficult, however, for our police department because there is no place for them to go to monitor the speed. There are entrances and exits to neighborhoods, but that's it. There's no shoulder, there's no pull-offs, there's nowhere for a police car to sit and see if people are going the speed. So the speed is probably even faster than 45 miles an hour in a lot of cases. So I would like us to circle back to VDOT. I don't know the cause of the accident. There was, however, an accident at that same location. I'll say 4 days. I think it was even less time, but there are also accidents at the curve. There's accidents at the Berkeley's Green Fieldcrest intersection. So I wondered if we could circle back to VDOT, get an updated accident report on that piece of the road if we could, and then see what we could possibly do going from there.
You are talking Green Springs Road.
Green Springs in the May. Yes, Green Springs, yes.
In
Thank you.
general.
In general.
Okay.
Thank you.
Ms. Sadler?
I Our EDA meeting was canceled this week. I just want to give a shout out to Chris and all of our IT team. They do an amazing job to keep us all moving along when some of us are not feeling well and can't be here, and circulating our message out there. So our staff does an amazing job. But this week, I just wanted to give a special shout out to that group. Say thanks for all you do. Behind the door.
Thank you. I just want to mention that on Sunday, I attended the Williamsburg James City Education Foundation Scholarship Award ceremony. A large number of students were recognized for their academic and other excellence, and received scholarships from a variety of sources, which made for a very nice day. I think the total amount of scholarship funding that was distributed was a little over $129,000 this year. So a pretty significant amount. And in addition to the VACO meeting that I attended with Ms. Larson and Mr. Stevens, Mr. Stevens and I attended the HR Hampton Roads Transportation Planning Organization and the Hampton Roads Planning District Commission meeting last Thursday, and heard a number of interesting presentations, and otherwise enjoyed an interesting drive back and forth. And with that,
Always is.
And now, reports to the county administrator.
Nothing this afternoon to report, sir.
Great, okay. So we then I entertain a motion for consideration of a personnel matter for the appointment of individuals to county boards and commissions pursuant to Section 2.23711A1 of the Code of Virginia, specifically appointments to the Williamsburg Regional Library Board of Trustees and appointment to the Economic Development Authority. And a second item for the closed session, discussion of the disposition of publicly held real property, where discussion in an open meeting would adversely affect the bargaining position of or negotiating strategy of the public body pursuant to Section 2.23711A3 of the Code of Virginia and pertaining to 101 Mounts Bay Road.
Motion?
Motion is made. Mr. Stevens, would you please call the roll?
Mr. Eisenhower?
Aye.
Mr. Hippel?
Aye.
Ms. Larson?
Aye.
Ms. Sadler?
Aye.
Mr. McGlinnan?
Aye.
Motion carries.
Okay.
So moved. I certify that we've talked about those things that we said that we would.
Mr. Stevens, would you call the roll, please?
Mr. Eisenhower?
Aye.
Mr. Hippel?
Aye.
Ms. Larson?
Aye.
Ms. Sadler?
Aye.
Mr. McGlinnan?
Aye.
Motion carries.
Okay.
Motion for adjournment until 5 PM on June 14th, 2022 for a regular meeting?
Mr. Stevens, call the roll, please.
Mr. Eisenhower?
Aye.
Mr. Hippel?
Aye.
Ms. Larson?
Aye.
Ms. Sadler?
Aye.
Mr. McGlinnan?
Aye.
Motion carries.
Meeting adjourned.